Hello, and welcome to another episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I'm your host, Amanda, and with me is my fabulous co host.
Hello, I'm Megan.
So, we are your messy, imperfect homeschool mom friends here to keep it real. If you're looking for a genuine homeschool community that values inclusivity, you've found your people.
Absolutely. So we are glad you're joining us for book club. If you read along, that's awesome. We hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments with us. Either leave a comment on the podcast or somewhere else, really pretty much anywhere. Send us a message. We just love getting feedback and love and mail and whatever, all of it. It's all good. If you're just listening along with us, equally as awesome. We don't judge. If you never read the book, we don't care. Just come and hang out. But we would love to know your big takeaways from the discussion of our book. So you definitely don't have to read along. We've just established that. But if you decide you'd like to get the book and read along, we have a link to the book in our show notes below and on social media, as well as a breakdown of reading week by week on our public Facebook page, on our Instagram. If you can't find them, I mean, who has time to hunt and peck, right? So if you can't find it, send us a DM. We will gladly send you the chapter breakdown if you'd like to read along with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we are currently reading The New Menopause by Mary Claire Haver. We've established previously, I'm terrible with names.
Hold on. Last week you called her Marie, so we're doing better.
Did I call her Marie? Okay, well, at least I got her first name right this week. Jeez Louise.
I didn't realize until we were editing, and I was like, Marie works too. Okay.
It starts with an M. I mean, look, you're going to call her Dr. Haver anyway. So, oh, Lord. I'm sorry. The good thing is she'll probably never listen to the podcast. So at least I haven't offended her. All right. We are a little more than halfway finished. So if you missed the first few chapters, feel free to go back and give them a listen. They're just the first two book club episodes of season 2. So this week we are discussing chapter 9 and the first half of the Menopause Toolkit, which is technically chapter 10. So let's go ahead and dive in.
Yeah, excellent. So chapter 9 is the daily behaviors that contribute to menopause health. And I have to say, I was telling Amanda when we were chatting earlier, like, I didn't take a ton of notes in this section because some of it seemed repetitive or obvious or whatever. But what I do have, we'll jump in, right? So on 137, she talks about the fact that when she learned about menopause in school, and we've talked about this, right? But I just love a good saying. So she said she learned that hot flashes, night sweats, and okay, I had to look up this word. Did you know this word, Amanda?
No.
Genitourinary syndrome, which we'll get to in a second. And basically that and osteoporosis were it. And I just like the fact that she said, talk about making a molehill out of a mountain. And I'm like a sucker for a good saying. But also she talks about this, I'm looking at my screen very carefully, genitourinary syndrome of menopause, GSM. And I Googled it and it says various menopausal symptoms and signs, including not only genital symptoms, dryness, burning, and irritation, and sexual symptoms, lack of lubrication, discomfort, or pain, and impaired function, but also urinary symptoms, urgency, dysuria, and recurrent urinary tract infections. And I feel like this is the first we're hearing of this term on page 137. And she just like throws it in there. That's a lot of shit to be wrapped up in one term, to just like gloss over it and not really tell us what it means. So in any event, that's what it means. I learned something new today. So yeah, definitely a molehill out of a mountain. And then the next note that I put was on the very next page, where she talks about she had been taught in medical school that women tend to we're going to get there. Somaticize. Oh my gosh. Somaticize. How's that?
I have no idea. No idea how you pronounce that word.
Okay. We're going to go with, okay. Women tend to somaticize or convert their psychological symptoms into physical ones. Okay, so that's really sexist and ugly in a lot of ways. And I totally get that. But at the same time, I am also a person who is 100% known for doing that, right? And so I had trouble, and I talked about this last week with like the quiz and stuff and I have a few things in this section that we're going to read today too, where it talks about these symptoms. And I'm like, right, but is that menopause or is that stress and anxiety? Because for me, those are very much linked. And I can give you the perfect example. Like I had a stressful period a couple of weeks ago, and I was stressed about something, and I must have been grinding my teeth at night or clenching my jaw overnight, maybe during the day too, but I was trying to be very aware of it during the day because I knew I was stressed, which caused tooth pain. So then I became convinced that a tooth that I had a root canal on like a year ago had gone bad. And it was starting to spread up into my sinus cavity and down into my neck, which was then causing muscular pain. And then I got a headache. And very, very quickly, I went from stressed and jaw clenching to brain tumor in my head. Like I 100% had a brain tumor, right? And so as much as this is sexist and gross from that perspective, I also very much identify and resemble that comment. So sometimes I have trouble kind of sussing out symptoms that we're reading about in the book, because I'm like, yeah, but I also get that from stress. Yeah, but I also get that from stress because I am red terror alert level Meagan, and that's just what I do, right? Worst case scenario, like all the time. I can tell you, give me any scenario, I will tell you the absolute worst possible thing that could come from that. And so yeah, I get it. I get why people say that. There must be a lot of people like me out there that cause that generalization to occur.
Yeah. I find it so interesting because I had the opposite situation, right? Where in my mid 20s, when I very first got sick, and I was seeing all of these specialists, and I'm like 9 specialists in a year or something. And they're all like, there's something wrong, but I don't know what it is. And finally, like I'm in my 3rd hospital system. I've had all these tests. They can't figure out what's wrong with me. And the doctor is like, I think it's time you go see this special shrink who literally specializes in figuring out if it's all in people's heads or if there's something actually wrong with them. And so, I mean, he ended up being the best person he was great. He was very good for people who had really complicated things. And he absolutely went to bat for me and was like, she is actually really sick and you need to figure out what it is, like, because it's really serious and it's getting bad very quickly and you're just not finding it. But that was his whole job. He did it for the university. He did it for like NIH. That was what he did, was figure out if people were actually sick. And I was like, oh, I mean, I'm glad that there's someone out there who does that, but it also kind of blows my mind that his entire practice was built around primarily figuring out if women were actually sick, like they were telling the doctors they were.
That's bananas. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I had the next comment.
I like this one.
Okay. So it's on page 139. The quote says, "One point that became clear after reviewing hundreds of studies is that there are universal truths about how we create good health after menopause. The first truth, good menopausal health is not an accident. And the second, it is never, ever going to be achieved as the result of a single pill or supplement or treatment. It is instead the result of adopting a collection of daily behaviors and habits that many of us may have previously neglected or that we just got away with being inconsistent about in our younger years." I'm like, seriously, F this noise. I'm like, okay, now I am going to say, in fairness, I feel this way about a lot of this chapter. There's just, yeah. Okay, so she goes on to say that the only things you need to do are an anti-inflammatory diet, making sure you're getting cardio, endurance, strength training, resistance training multiple times a week, use evidence-based pharmacology, strategic supplementation, reduce your stress, optimize your sleep, and be sure to be engaged in your community. Like, oh, is that all I need to do to make sure I can go through this major change in my life in a healthy way? Sure, no problem. I'll get right on that. Let me just pencil those things in. I'll quit my job. I'll quit all of my other hobbies and I'll take care of these things. Like, really?
There was a section later where she was rattling off, I think it was about stress reduction or something, like tips and whatever. And it started with something about exercise and it said 150 minutes or whatever. And I go, if this woman tells me that I need to exercise 150 minutes a day, I'm done. Like, I'm closing this book.
Right?
I'm like, sometimes I struggle to find time to wash my hair. I'm like, She is, right? But then it was per week. And I was like, you have been saved. You have redeemed yourself, because if you told me per day, I was like, you are insane, woman. So yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's it. Like a few pages later, it is. So page 143, stress reduction. And I'm just like, okay, seriously. So for stress reduction, make sure you focus on your diet, improve your sleep hygiene, exercise often, get in that self-care. Oh, and don't forget to relax. Like, yeah, okay, I'll get right on that. Like, because like how which do you want me to do? Do you want me to relax, or do you want me to make sure I do all of these other things? Because they can't both happen at the same time.
Right.
I don't For me, it's like someone saying, don't think about the pink elephant. And then all you can think about is the pink elephant. Like,
yeah, it's not working. And I would like to say, as somebody who lives their life wound tighter than a spring, I've tried all those things. So it's really interesting. I have never judged someone else who chooses mental health medications for their mental health needs, right? But for whatever reason, when it came to myself, that was quitting and giving up. So when other people did it, I was like, good for them. Like, that's awesome. I'm glad it's helping them. Right. But then for myself, it was like, no, I've got this. I can figure this out. I'm going to crack this nut. Right. I've got this. Yeah. I don't got this. Okay. So I mean, when I tell you, I've done yoga, I focused on hydration, meditation, supplements, essential oils. I was like bathing in essential oils, like stress blends. And there's somebody who had shared the Xanax blend of essential oils that's like, and you make them in your homemade roller balls and the whole thing. And I was like slathering this stuff all over my body, right? Clean diet, you name it. I did it. Sometimes it's okay. Sometimes that's just not going to work. There are people who that's not going to manage your stress. And I kind of lump stress and anxiety together because for me, they're very intertwined. When one's out of check, the other one's out of check. They're always pretty much in lockstep with one another. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there and be like, if you're reading this and thinking like, oh, if I do enough yoga, I'll be completely de-stressed. No, you freaking might not. And that's okay. And it is not quitting. And I will tell you, to this day, it's been years and years since I quote unquote quit and finally was like, I need help that's not yoga and essential oils. And every day I'm like, why the hell did this take me so long? Like, why did it take me so long to get here? So if you are ever in that same position where you're like, it's great when other people do it, but it's not for me, it's probably for you. And it's amazing. Talk to somebody who knows, but do the thing because it's life-changing. And she doesn't really, what she says might work for the average bear, but I'm not the average bear. So it's not going to be enough.
Yeah. I mean, in fairness, I don't have a ton of stress, but that's because I don't worry about a lot of these things. Like, you don't get to put this stuff, like worrying about this and having to prioritize doing all of this crap. Now that stresses me out. So like, people are like, oh, did you do Marie Kondo? Like, no, Marie Kondo is just stress. Don't bring that into my life. I don't need that amount of stress to make me unstressed. Like, no, thank you. There's one more thing that I'm not going to live up to. And then I'm going to feel guilty about not doing it. And I'm going to feel bad about falling behind. No, I'm good. Thank you very much.
We did our episode a while ago on vision boarding, which Amanda just loved when I went off on like my hippie tangent. And Amanda was like, what the hell is she talking about? Right. But it's awesome if you want to go check it out. But I literally had like stress mantras about reducing stress on my vision board was like slathered in them. And, nothing, relax, nothing is under your control. To what your point is, like, you can't put that on me. And logically, I'm like, yeah, it's not under my control. And so the effort of putting all that stress in and the physical toll that it's taking on my body isn't helping at all because it still doesn't control the outcome. But it also, even that logic does not also let me let go of it. Right. So it's funny because when you just said that, I'm like, oh, you're like my husband. Like it was so funny because I was talking to one of my kids when I had the brain tumor headache and I'm not making light of brain tumor. My husband's a cancer survivor. Like, I get it. But I was like, literally, like, I have a brain tumor. And so I called my husband and I go, I have this pain and I think it might be a tooth, but then it's radiating and now I have a headache and I'm convinced it's a brain tumor. And my husband literally can just go, you don't have a brain tumor. And I'm like, oh, thank you. Like, that's all it takes sometimes, but only from him. If anybody else tried to do it, it wouldn't work. But he's like you, where he's just like, it's fine. It's going to be fine. It's not, it's okay. And somehow that allows me to let go of things. So he's like my person. And sometimes when I call him and just say out loud the thing that's,
Mm.
and I mean, I've been festering on this for days or weeks at this point, and it has reached a
Yeah.
level that is so ridiculous where I have spiraled to. And when I say it out loud to him, he'll be like the look, he doesn't even have to say anything. The look on his face is so like, I cannot believe that I am married to you and that we're having this conversation and that you're this freaking crazy. Like, but, and then at the end, he's just like, none of that's happening. Right. And I'm like, I know, but I needed you to tell me that. Like, somehow it works, but only from him. Anybody else. And I'm like, you're just placating me. We're all dying. It's happening. It's fun. It's fun being married to me. I'm sure he somehow does it.
Well, the first step is realizing that you need help beyond yoga. And you did that. So good for you.
In multiple ways.
Yeah. There you go. All right. So back to good old the new menopause book by Mary or Marie or whatever I'm calling her this week. On page 144, she talks about sleep optimization. She's talked about it a few other times. I do like the fact that she very clearly points out a few things, like the fact that the temperature in your room should be between 60 and 67 degrees. I think especially for a lot of Americans, that seems really cold. And the idea that you would have your room that cold for like good sleep hygiene is a bit foreign. So I think that's a useful thing to actually put out there. I know I personally do this, but I have to run the AC to be able to have my room be that cold and to be able to have a quiet, disturbance-free room, because we live in the city. I can't be opening my condo window and expect it to be quiet. Thank goodness we have really good soundproofing. So with the noise machine and the AC running, like we have this great environment. But I also realize that that's an absolute privilege that not everyone has for a wide variety of reasons. So I think that's kind of like good points, but also not necessarily realistic for everyone.
I'll be talking to you about that in the summer, because it's very common in Portugal for homes not to have heating or cooling, which ours does not. So in the winter, everybody rolls out their little space heaters. And then in the summer, you open your windows and run fans. So in the summer, I'll be like with my noise canceling headphones and whatever else, because I don't live in the land of air conditioning anymore, but it's all good.
When I was pregnant in Belgium in the summer, we absolutely got one of those little fake air conditioners that you put ice cubes in and it blows cold air on you for like 6 to 8 hours overnight.
What fun is that?
Yes, it's a thing. It's a thing in Europe. So you'll get to probably experience that.
Our landlord, who's just the sweetest. So our apartment is 2 floors, which sounds super fancy. It's not. The second floor is an attic and you can only stand up in the middle of the room. And one of my kids is 6 feet tall. So like, we really had to have a conversation of like, is that going to be okay for you? And he was like, yeah, I mean, we're just going to sleep and, sit at the table and whatever. Like, I'm not going to be like wandering around up there, because that's his and my other son's room. But we liked this apartment for that reason, because that attic space was finished. And so it just has 2 small windows up there that are skylight windows that open up. And so you're not going to get a ton of breeze because they're up, they're not sideways. Mm-hmm. And so we had all these conversations and I was like, we can get fans and we can do whatever we can to make it comfortable, but are you guys going to be okay with that? And then right before we moved in, the landlord messaged me and was like, we've decided to put an air conditioning unit up there. And I was like, oh my goodness, I have no idea what it's going to cost me to run it, but I'm excited about it. But so at least upstairs, hey, if it gets too hot, we'll all just drag ourselves upstairs and sleep in the loft.
Yep. Aero beds for everyone.
Exactly. The boys will love that. It'll be like, great, everybody's here. Yep. Including my mom, who pees 10 times a night. Like up, down, up, down, up, down.
Welcome to perimenopause, boys.
Exactly. I just talk about how big their heads and shoulders were all the time and blame them for it. It's good. My daughter too. I'll be like, your shoulders were the biggest out of everybody. She's like, how is this my fault?
Oh man. Okay. So my next comment was on page 145. And she's just talking about the community engagement piece that we kind of mentioned earlier, saying that it's really important at this point to not feel alone. And that's one of those, it's a good point, right? Like we're all going to go through perimenopause, but no one's on the same timeline. So, and everyone has different symptoms and experiences. And So the people in your immediate circle, they might not be there with you, but you can use online communities to make sure that you find people who understand and are that sympathetic ear. Obviously, like we are pro online community. We have close to 1,000 people in our private online community. Like we're pro online community. But if you're looking for something that's specific to perimenopause, menopause, she lists off some to look into. She has one called Pause Life Community, but then she also says there's Hey Perry, and it's PERRY, but I suppose it stands for perimenopause, even though it's spelled like a male name. There's Stripes, there's The Swell, and then Palopause.
Awful name is that?
I know. I'm like these names are. I mean, you have. I suppose you have to have a sense of humor.
Yeah,
right? Like
The Swell.
The Swell. Welcome to hell. You've swelled up. You'll never fit in your clothes again, unless you do intermittent fasting and a whole bunch of other things. Which brings me to my next wonderful point. So, also on page 145, starts the list of menopausal best practices. Are you ready?
I'm buckled up.
Okay. Consider intermittent fasting. Utilize a nutrition tracking mechanism. Consume 80 plus grams of protein a day. Consume less than 25 grams of added sugar a day. Consume more than 25 grams of fiber a day. Stretch every day. Balance training every day. Resistance training. Cardiovascular training. Consider hormone therapy. Consider other pharmacological things as needed. Supplement fiber to surpass 25 grams a day. Supplement omega-3 fatty acids to equal 2 grams a day. Supplement vitamin D, 4,000 IU per day with vitamin K. Supplement specific collagen peptides for bone strength and skin collagen. Consider turmeric. Consider vitamin E. View sunlight, touch grass, use additional strategies like yoga, meditation, journaling, exercise, setting boundaries, walking along the beach, or hiking in nature. Limit alcohol intake, wear a sleep tracking device, incorporate good sleep hygiene habits. There you go.
It's so simple. No, why are people struggling with menopause when it's so easy to work around?
Yeah, I mean, no problem. There you go.
Oh my gosh, that's great. I'm dying laughing.
I mean,
yeah, I'll get right on that. I'm over here trying to get used to drinking soda that doesn't have high fructose corn syrup in it in Europe. And I'm like, oh, she'd be so proud of me. I'm like, this really doesn't taste very good.
So there were two things in that list that I did want to pull out and highlight. So the protein thing, it's not exactly 80 grams. Technically, you're supposed to have at least 1.3 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of ideal body weight per day. Okay, so take your weight. If you're an American, you're going to have to divide that by 2.2 or just do, the whole Google, I weighed this much. What is it in kilograms? And it'll tell you. And then you multiply that by 1.3 or 4 or 5 or 1.6. I'm going to tell you that roughly that means you need 80 to 90 grams of protein a day.
You did the math for us. I like it.
I don't know. I mean, I looked up, right? I was like, what do you have to do to actually get that much protein every day? I'm not doing it.
Walking around eating tuna fish right out of a can or something.
I mean, it was like, I just looked at the meals and I was like, oh my gosh, I would feel so just heavy. I'm like, if I tried to consume all of that and that much of everything, I would feel so well,
I wonder too, Americans are like meat with every meal, protein with every meal, right? And there are other countries that are like that too, but it's not the majority. Then you go, I was watching this thing about breakfasts in the Netherlands, right? Which is like bread with butter and sprinkles, which is so horrifying to me. Like, I'm so sorry if you're in the Netherlands.
Sprinkles.
I can't. And, and so I'm like, how on earth would anybody in those countries, I mean, it's so not common to eat that much protein in those countries. Like, how on earth would anybody achieve that? Is that to say that they're all doomed to suffer through endless menopause? Like that, it feels like it's skewed towards the American way of life to say like that much protein, or not necessarily just American, but countries that consume high protein already. Because it's even higher.
I mean, it is. It is very high. I don't know, because if you go like looking, right, it's a lot of like, you can have yogurt and, like there's a lot. And so, like in Asian countries, you're drinking a lot more yogurt with each meal to help with that kind of stuff.
But there's not that much protein in yogurt. It's not like eating like chicken or fish or something.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it does talk a lot about plant-based options, but I mean, that was the thing for me. I'm like, by the time you eat enough of that, like apparently I don't eat enough in general, because I'm just like, I can't, like, tonight I had a bowl of soup that had 15 grams of protein in it from plant-based sources, quinoa, lentils, and whatever. And it was very tasty, but it was also very filling. I'm like, I don't know how I'm supposed to get another 20 grams of protein in here. Like, I'm full. So
just start pounding hard-boiled eggs all day long. That would be lovely.
Oh, yeah. You know how much I like eggs? I don't like eggs.
Oh, I don't like eggs either. I find them so vile. Yeah.
My preferred way to eat eggs is with ketchup and hot sauce.
As long I like as them in like a cake. Sauce. In a cake works for me. Like, yeah. Or like they are. I'll even go pancake. Okay. Like if we're going breakfast foods, like I'll go pancake. But yeah, who was the first person that was like, this just fell out of a chicken's ass? I wonder what we could do with this. I bet you we could prepare this 750 different ways. Anything that comes out of a chicken's ass must be good. Like, what the hell? Who was that person?
So I find myself eating far more eggs than I want, only because it's so often included in the free breakfast that we get with the hotel stuff that we do. And it's like the one thing that like we were in, like Ethiopia, and there's all of these different things. And you're like, okay, well, that's bound to make me sick, and like, that's way too greasy. Like that's not going to work for a breakfast, and like, I was like, okay, I guess it's eggs. So I'm like, I'm so American. I travel with my hot sauce. I pull out my little bottle of Tabasco or my little bottle of, oh, no, I can't even remember what it's called. The rooster sauce, the Asian rooster sauce.
And I know the bottle you're talking about.
Yeah.
It was short for a while, right? And people lost their minds. Like it was hard to find. Yeah. I can't remember the name of it though. Yeah.
Yeah, we keep it at home. So I have little bottles of both of those, and I travel with them now. I just like because hotel breakfasts require hot sauce, and you can't get that outside of the United States, generally speaking, to go with your eggs. So yeah, the other thing in this section specifically that I kind of took issue with was on page 147. She has her little spiel about limiting alcohol intake. And I'm going to say, I don't care if you drink or not, right? Like, I have if you have a reason to not drink alcohol, whatever that reason is, by all means, go on with your bad self, right? I do have a problem with this new purity culture thing that's super trendy right now about like, don't drink alcohol and all alcohol is bad for you. And all like, you want to know how many things are bad for us? Like riding in a car is fucking bad for us. Like, of course, alcohol is a little bad for us, but everything in moderation is fine. Exactly. Like I am not down with like, it feels like this in a lot of ways for me, it feels like a way to try to control women. There was this big push of, women, the red wine and blue, and we'll get together and we drink red wine, and and we fight the patriarchy. And it was this big movement in the last election in the suburbs, and all of these kinds of things, and women drinking wine with their book clubs, and they're getting together and they're organizing and they're creating community. And now all of a sudden you should never drink. And I'm just like, who the fuck is putting that out there? Because I think that it's a little bit more sketchy than it would seem on the surface. And she goes into saying, like, literally, she says, don't drink because, quote, our alcohol tolerance appears to plummet. We need more research on this, as our hormones do, end quote. Like, if you don't have the research to back it up, don't fucking put it in the book.
Right.
Like, you just, like.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just skimmed over that because I don't drink, and does not go well with my red terror alert personality. Go figure. So I didn't think of, and so I didn't even know that red wine and blue was a thing. Nobody invited me to any of those things, but that's so interesting. I didn't know that. I learned something new today.
Yeah. So I encourage anyone who's listening to think on that a little, like by all means, if it's not a good choice for you, I'm not saying you have to drink, but let's be aware of some of these things and where they're coming from.
So you're not participating in dry January is what you're telling us.
No, I don't need just like I don't need to come up with New Year's resolutions besides try not to be an ass. I don't like
it works.
Yeah.
All right. So we have plenty more to discuss, but in the meantime, we wanted to say a big thank you to our sponsor, Hub of Curiosity. They offer classes on OutSchool that are top rated and super popular. OutSchool can be quite spendy. We are the first to admit it. We're both OutSchool moms, and sometimes we look at the price tag and we're like, this class better freaking be good for that price. But Hub of Curiosity themselves did a major revamp, and now all of their classes, group classes, and self-paced classes are $12 or less. And you don't need a coupon code. It's not like it's an introductory price, and because there's so many of that, right? Like first week is $1 and then the next week is 22, that's not the case. It's just always $12 or less for every single class. So they're high quality and budget friendly. You'll find everything from multi-sensory classes for multiplication and spelling to engineering. They go into, there's a class that goes into like every moving part in a car, soldering. I mean, really cool stuff that's over there. So something for everyone. So there is a link. If you're new to OutSchool, there's a link in the description that'll give you $20 off your first class. And as always, let us know if you have any questions about this resource. We're both homeschool parents. Will be happy to help you figure out how to navigate it. There's 140,000 classes ish on OutSchool, which is amazing, but also really overwhelming. So if you need help figuring it out, come join our Facebook group, send us a DM, whatever. We'll be happy to help you figure it out. But Hub of Curiosity is a great place to start, and we thank them for their sponsorship.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So that brings us to chapter 10, which is like half of the book. It's a ginormous chapter. So we broke it up into two sections. We're going to do half of it today and then half of it next week with like the appendices or whatever. So the chapter 10 is called The Menopause Toolkit, a symptom-based resource section. And section it is. Okay, so my first comment was just right at the very beginning. She has this quote. She says, "For far too long, non-classic symptoms of menopause have been dismissed by the medical community as solely a result of aging, and this dismissal has resulted in a failure to treat, validate, or evaluate patients needlessly suffering from menopausal symptoms." And I think that that's really like the entire book in a nutshell, right? So this chapter it's a lot of repeat. It's a huge list of non-classic symptoms. And I think that's the real value of this chapter and possibly this book, right? Sure, the suggestions under each one could also be helpful, maybe sometimes. I'm a little on the fence about that. But a long ass list of symptoms that are actually perimenopause and menopause related, it's just so needed. Like, I don't know who else is listening to this and is like, oh, I went on Google and tried to like say, is this a symptom of perimenopause? And Google was like, crickets, right?
Could be, couldn't be, might not, maybe. Like, gee, that was helpful.
Yeah, and for me, I'm like, peer-reviewed research on shortened periods for perimenopause. I'm like, oh, enjoy all of these no results found. Like, cool, good. That's very helpful.
Lucky you. I was Googling our longer periods of symptoms of perimenopause.
Oh no, the amount of time between them.
Oh,
right?
gotcha.
So,
okay.
Yeah. Oh no, I easily have, 8 to 10 days and then it's back again 16 days later. Like, oh, that is not fair. Okay. Like,
okay, good. Because I was going to be really upset with you for a minute.
Yeah.
Like, is it normal to bleed like a dying animal for 2 days during your period during perimenopause? I think I need a transfusion.
Right? What is up with that? Seriously, what is up with that? And then like the other like 5 or 6 days of just spotting. Like,
Yes.
okay, how is there still more blood to be lost? And then I randomly, one day this past cycle that I had, I like, okay, I had my 2 days where it's like awful and I can hardly leave the house. So it's going to be easy. And it was easy until the middle of the night where suddenly like, I was like, oh, it's back. And
because you can
I
feel like the gushing, which is
No.
like post birth. Like I remember, I
Yes.
don't remember which kid it was, but I remember like sitting up just the tiniest bit in bed and feeling like this like whoosh. And I was like, and now we're freaking back at it. And I haven't even shot a human being out of my vagina. Like, what the hell?
It's such an awful feeling of like, oh, and like, and it hurts, you know, you feel like, oh God, oh, there it goes. And then you're like, oh man. Oh,
This
awful.
is not good. Yeah.
Awful.
There we are.
Yep. Okay. So I had the next comment as well. It's on just the next page, 149. And she does say, I appreciated the fact like she's a doctor and she's obviously very pro hormone treatment, menopause hormone treatment or therapy. But she does say to always try the nutrition option first before trying the other things. And she makes a real point of being like, this is not about like restrict your caloric intake. This is about, you know, eat more of this or that to get more of this vitamin or to address this kind of thing. And so I did appreciate that. So then that we just kind of like dive into them and we each pulled kind of different things out. For me, one of the first ones that she covers is androgen induced conditions. And it's like this umbrella thing that covers lots of things. And it covers body odor, stinky sweat, acne. Hello, I have more of that than I did when I was a teen, hair loss. I personally, like a few years ago, I was diagnosed with 2 types of hair loss, one being androgenic alopecia. And at the time, I was told absolutely nothing about it being perimenopause related or being offered anything around that, right? Like, I'm like, how did that, like, what is happening here? But I will say, quick funny story. A week or 2 ago, I attended like an online virtual travel conference. And one of the presentations was this young professional woman, I'm going to guess late 20s, maybe early 30s, who presented on how to travel for a week or more with only a purse. And I was just like, she has definitely not hit perimenopause where you can't rewear your clothes, right? Like, I'm at that stage, right? Maybe I can wear my shirt one additional time. Maybe I want to wear my pants one additional time, but I got a funk, you know, and like if I'm out doing things, the chances of me like starting to sweat when I'm climbing a set of stairs or I'm stuck in the sun for a few minutes and I only have to sweat for a few minutes before it's like I'm not wearing those clothes again until they've been washed. Like,
because I find once the sweating starts, it's like a river. Like if I can keep it from starting, we're good. But once it starts, there's no stopping it.
It's puddling. Yeah, no. Yeah. And I cannot imagine trying to travel with only 3 shirts and being like, this will be fine because you know you're going to start sweating on the airplane, right? Like at some point, they're going to turn off the AC and you're going to start sweating and it's going to be all over. And that outfit has to be washed, right? Like,
well, then just plain funk anyway. Like anything on the plane needs to be washed.
Yeah.
Even pre-COVID, I felt that way. Like plain air is just stale and gross.
Like, get off of the airplane. That I have always had that rule, right? Like when you get wherever you're going, we shower. Everybody showers. Okay, so let's see. What else did we have? Skipping ahead a few pages, one that I found that was interesting, I did not know, on page 158, she talks about late onset asthma. This was a new one to me. I did not know that you could develop asthma in perimenopause or menopause. I personally have had asthma my whole life, but yeah, basically menopause and asthma suck. If you develop it because of menopause or perimenopause, it's harder to treat. And if you've always had it, the hormone therapy might make it worse. So really, asthma and menopause, not a good time.
Yeah, it's just bad news, like all the way around. Like more, flip the page, more bad news, flip the page, more bad news. Great. Okay.
Cool. Great. Awesome.
On 165, I wanted to put out a call for suggestions. She brings up intermittent fasting in this book more than I would have predicted a medical doctor would. Although granted, she seems to be a bit of like an outlier in the medical community, given that she's looking at this kind of holistic approach, like a whole person approach, and actually studying menopause. And, all of these things are not mainstream medical community anyway, but she brings up intermittent fasting and seems to be kind of pro intermittent fasting. And I've heard of it. Obviously, we have a friend who does it, and I've never paid any attention to it because I was like, oh, this is Atkins paleo. What's the other one where the people pull the cheese off and eat just the cheese and the pepperoni? Keto, right? It's like, oh my gosh. So it's like, there's so many fads out there. And I just figured it was one of those. So like, I never paid attention to it, but she keeps bringing it up. So now I want to read a book about it. So if you have a legitimately good book that you have read and liked about intermittent fasting, I would love to hear about it. So tell us in the comments, because I'd be keen to learn more.
Yeah.
Can't say I'm going to do it, but I'd be keen to learn more.
Yeah. So she's the author of the Galveston Diet, which I had seen that book. I'd heard of that book. I wonder if that is about intermittent fasting or if it's just a different type of something. I don't know. I also have
the next point, so I'm going to Google it while you do that. Okay. Sorry, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I have a friend who has had great success with intermittent fasting. In the book, she specifically recommends the 16-8, which means you don't eat for 16 hours and then you do eat for 8 hours. Like I could not do that. I could do 14-10. It's also extra challenging for me because I take a lot of medication that I take medication 4 different times throughout the day, and I have to eat with it all the time. So I have to eat a half an hour before I wake up and take my medication. And then I have another one that I have to eat and take my medication right before I go to bed, which are both quite challenging for healthy habits. So yeah, I do have to be functioning for more than 8 hours of the day.
Yes. So the Galveston Diet is intermittent fasting.
Okay.
So there's your book.
Well,
maybe one, because she's definitely got a horse in that race or whatever the saying is. Yeah,
exactly. So it'd be interesting to see if there's any others or like really good, like resourced, well-sourced articles on it. Cause I don't know that much about it. Okay. So the next thing was on I have the next one on 167. It's about brain fog. So there's a couple quotes that I pulled out. She says, quote, brain fog is most likely to begin happening during perimenopause when your estrogen levels start to fluctuate. You have estrogen receptors in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, which are areas of the brain responsible for memory and other cognitive functions. When estrogen levels decline, those receptors may not be triggered to perform activities essential to recall, concentration, and focus, leaving you feeling about as sharp as a cotton ball. I was like, wow, that seems a little harsh, but yeah. One of those things, right? It's nice when sometimes they like actually explain exactly what's happening or why like suddenly you can't remember anything. I couldn't remember sriracha sauce earlier in the episode.
Oh, that's what it is.
What I put on my eggs. So yeah, there you go. And then just in the next paragraph down, she says, quote, often menopausal brain fog creates feelings of concern because people fear it may be a sign of dementia. But dementia is rare before the age of 64. So cognitive challenges that happen in your 40s and 50s are more likely to be a result of declining hormone levels. And she also then makes a note that most of the time it reverses once you become postmenopausal. So I was like, oh, well, that's nice.
Something to look forward to, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Finally, some good news. Yeah,
finally.
Not surprisingly, her strategies for managing brain fog are very similar to the list of strategies that Amanda has already talked about, maybe are a lot, right? So monitoring your blood pressure, cholesterol levels, and blood sugar, and treating any high levels that are detected, avoiding smoking and excessive drinking. This was the 150 minutes, right? Getting 150 minutes of moderate to intensity. Oh, getting at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity each week, managing weight gain, staying socially connected, getting cognitive exercise, reading, learning something new. Oh, look at that. You're here learning something new today with us and helping your perimenopause symptoms and your brain fog. Congratulations. Right. But yeah,
Well
it's like,
done, you.
it's hard to do any of those things when you have brain fog. But yeah, I get it.
Yeah. I did like, though, that she highlighted the building community, like staying socially active and
Mhm.
connected, and the like learning something new, reading, like crossword puzzles, all those kinds of things. I think a lot of people don't realize how beneficial those things are when you're trying to protect against dementia and things like that. And so it makes sense that it would also apply to brain fog.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's see what else. Oh, she did say on page 170, if you want to delve more deeply into the neuroscience aspects of menopause, she recommends a book called The Menopause Brain by Dr. Lisa Mosconi, I'm guessing. Mosconi. So if that's something, if you're listening, you're like, oh, I would like to learn more about that. There you go. There's a resource for you.
Something to add to our to be read list. Always good.
No, let's not.
Okay, 171. Okay, I had an aha moment on 171. But again, this is my game. Is it perimenopause or is it stress and anxiety? So I started having breast pain, which she talks about here, cyclical breast pain, when we lived in North Carolina. So that would have been like 5 years ago, 5 to 6 years ago. So I would have been in my late 30s. I'll be 44 in like, 2 months from today. It's 2 months till my birthday. Okay. So I would have been 38, 39. But I also shared in a previous episode that my mom was said and done with menopause by 37. So here I am. I attributed that to stress and anxiety, but I'm like, was it a perimenopause symptom? Like, I don't know. And that's just like a game show of my life. Is it perimenopause or is it anxiety? Right. But it got to the point where I was wearing like sports bras during my, like tight sports bras during my period, because it was like that first trimester breast tenderness that's like, oh my God, like if a breeze blows through the room, you're like, right. And so I was like really surprised that that was a perimenopause symptom. I was like, oh, maybe that was a thing. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, see, and I didn't realize that that wasn't something everyone dealt with, because I have for years and years, I can tell you when I ovulated because my breasts hurt the next day. I'm like, oh, ovulated. There it goes. My nipples are killing me.
If you're trying to get pregnant, it's a little
bra.
too little too late. You're like, could you tell me the day before?
Like, that's it. I mean, you always knew when you didn't have to worry about doing the deed anymore, because like, oh, if you touch my breast, I will punch you. So we don't have to have sex anymore. We're good for this month. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was one of those things. I was reading it. She's like, oh, this happens to some people. I'm like, you mean not everyone knows exactly where they are in their cycle based on how sore their breasts are? How interesting.
Wasn't that in Mean Girls where the one was like, she can always tell when it rains because her breasts hurt or something? It was like, she's like, what's the weather for tomorrow?
Yeah, I seem to recall that as well. Yep, there you go. So the next one on page 174, she talks about burning sensation in the mouth and on the tongue. I had no idea this was an actual thing. It's literally called burning mouth syndrome, BMS. So not a thing that I have, but if you're listening and this is something that you're like, oh my God, that's totally me. I didn't know it was a real thing. It is a thing. There are easy things you can try. You should totally check it out.
There you go. There's some really odd diseases out there. When I was pregnant with my first kid, I had to have a whole bunch of blood work done. And one of the things I got tested for, I think it was called like maple syrup syndrome or something like that. And I was like, you are clearly making this up. Right. But they weren't. It was a whole thing. It was like when it comes to like Judaism and pregnancy, you always hear about Tay-Sachs. That's like the one thing you're like, oh yeah, everybody gets tested for Tay-Sachs, like blah, blah, blah. Oh no, there's like 44 known genetic markers that Jewish women are tested for all the maple syrup syndrome was one of them. And so then when I got pregnant again, I was like, thank God I don't have to do like a needle phobe. So I was like, oh, thank God I don't have to get all that blood work done again because we've already established. But they were like, oh no, you have to do it with every kid. I'm like, my genetics have changed since the last kid. Like I still don't understand why I had to keep redoing it, but I do not have maple syrup syndrome in case anyone's wondering. I forget if that was the actual something about maple syrup. I just remember being like, I'm pretty sure you just made that up. You just want to charge my insurance company more money.
They're like, what else can we do?
This one seems to hate needles. Let's come up with reasons to stab her.
Perfect. Wonderful. So the last kind of big section in this part that we read for today talks about fatigue. So she's got a whole lot of pages about fatigue and talking about how important it is to exercise. And I know you have some comments, some notes about this section as well. The one thing that I do want to say is at the very end of it, she kind of throws in, oh yeah, and there's chronic fatigue syndrome or ME, depending on where you live and where you're listening to us from. And she's like, it's complicated and disabling, and menopausal fatigue and chronic fatigue overlap a lot. Okay. I have a lot to say, and I'm going to try to keep it real short. Please make sure that your fatigue isn't chronic fatigue syndrome. If you have chronic fatigue syndrome, pushing yourself with exercise can actually be really, really bad for your body. It can cause these massive crashes and significant worsening of symptoms. So, yeah, like not all fatigue is the same. I have personally had chronic fatigue for a very long time. And this is one of those things that I really struggle with. And I have to be very careful with pacing. And there's all of this language around that. And we won't go into that. But if I were to try to do any of the things that she's suggesting in the fatigue section, at the very least, be stuck in bed indefinitely and very likely end up in the hospital, right? So like just be aware, not all fatigue is the same. And this is definitely one of those like, make sure. And chronic fatigue, unfortunately, is much more common in menopausal women as they age, more women than men, all of that good stuff. So one of those, make sure you know what you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Good advice. I liked that she shared statistics about fatigue here. So she says 19.7% of premenopausal women report symptoms of physical and mental exhaustion. 19.7% before this whole shit show begins. Once you get to perimenopause, it goes from 19.7% to 46.5%, which is bananas, right? And then in postmenopause, an alarming 85.3% of women experience fatigue. So this is not one of those like, don't worry, it gets better after menopause. No, it like at that point, only less than 15% of women aren't tired at that point. So I'll just be like a professional napper by the time I get to that age. So
after 3:00,
I'll mess up my healthy sleep schedule, right?
That's not sleep optimization.
She would die if she saw my sleep schedule. I mean, I live in a house of raging ADHD people, and ADHD brains are not known for healthy sleep schedules. It's just like not our jam. And so, yeah, she would be horrified if she saw some of what goes on around here. But it's physiological the same way any of this other stuff is, right? It's not a matter of just being like, I will try harder. I mean, you can try harder, but there's a realistic expectation of what's actually going to happen there. So,
yeah.
Interesting, right? Yeah.
Yep. All right. So before we sign off, we do just want to remind you that Homeschool Moms Unfiltered is not just a podcast. Obviously, we are a podcast, we are a book club, but we are also a source of community. We are going to need community. We're going to need to be able to lean on our supportive, like-minded, progressive, inclusive fellow homeschoolers so much more than we have in the last few years, in the coming years. So please come and join us. If you're listening and you would like more community, we host a private Facebook group. It's called Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. It's a group. You search for it. You'll have to answer some questions and wait for us to approve it. We also host a Patreon with secular vetted monthly unit studies and 2 live meetups each month. It has various subscription levels that get you different things. But come join us. Come find your people.
Yeah, we would love to welcome you. So, in fact, we have a code for our Patreon memberships that'll give you 90% off your first month. The highest level tier we have is $12 US dollars. So, it'll give you 90% off your first month, and then it will revert to 12, 7, or 5, if I'm remembering the tiers off the top of my head correctly. But we would love to welcome you. So, the code is FTP90. This is inauguration week 2025, and I was feeling pretty salty when I made the code. So FTP stands for fuck the patriarchy. It'll be pretty easy to remember. FTP90. Enter that and it'll take 90% off your first month's membership if you'd like to come and join us. Come make some friends. We host a mom's night out. All genders are welcome. Spouses are welcome. Come and enjoy a homeschool Q&A advice session every month where you can come and ask about curriculum, unschooling, world schooling, parenting, whatever. You want to dig into anything that we've covered in our episodes, but you want it to be very, very specific to you, come. We'd love to chat with you. Come and enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. And so thank you so much. That pretty much wraps us up for the day. We hope you tune in next week for the second half of the toolkit. And in the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Have a great day.